What would you do if you found a bleeding woman and 7 terrified children hiding in your barn, with a killer hunting them through a Montana blizzard? Tonight, I'm bringing you a story that shook an entire state to its core. A story of one man's split-second decision that changed 8 lives forever. This is the true account of Caleb Holt, a widowed rancher who thought he'd lost everything, until the coldest night in Montana's history forced him to choose between safety and salvation. Stay with me until the very end of this journey. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The wind that night didn't howl. It screamed. Caleb Holt had lived through 43 Montana winters, survived 2 tours overseas, and buried a wife he'd loved more than his own breath. He thought he'd seen every shade of cold the world could offer. But the blizzard that descended on his ranch on February 14th wasn't just cold. It was biblical, apocalyptic. The kind of cold that froze diesel fuel in the tank and made grown men weep. Temperature had dropped to 38 below zero, the kind of cold where your breath crystallized before it left your mouth, where exposed skin turned black in under 3 minutes, where the very air seemed to crack and splinter around you. Caleb stood at his kitchen window at 11:47 p.m., watching snow pile against the barn in drifts that reached nearly to the roof. The power had cut out 2 hours ago. His generator chugged somewhere in the darkness, keeping just enough electricity flowing to prevent his pipes from bursting and his remaining cattle from freezing to death in their stalls. He should have been in bed, should have been trying to sleep through the storm like any sensible person. But sleep had become a stranger to Caleb Holt in the 3 years since Sarah died. These days, he measured time in chores completed and bottles emptied, in sunrise and sunset, in the endless monotony of survival. The ranch stretched across 400 acres of unforgiving Montana prairie, miles from the nearest neighbor, further still from town. It had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had built the original homestead in 1889. His grandfather had expanded it. His father had modernized it. And Caleb? Caleb was watching it slowly die, one frozen season at a time. He hadn't always been this way, this hollow shell of a man going through motions. There'd been a time when this land sang to him, when every sunrise felt like a promise, when Sarah's laugh could chase away the darkest winter. But cancer doesn't care about love or laughter or promises. It had taken her in the spring, when everything should have been coming back to life. The cruelty of that timing hadn't been lost on him. Now the ranch felt like a tomb. A beautiful, snow-covered tomb that demanded his labor and gave nothing back but isolation. Caleb turned from the window, his reflection ghosting across the darkened glass. A tall man gone gaunt, weathered skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. He wore the same flannel shirt he'd been wearing for 3 days, the same jeans stained with motor oil and cattle feed. His dark hair, shot through with premature gray, stuck up at odd angles. He'd stopped caring about appearances the day he buried Sarah. The wind rattled the windows in their frames, and somewhere outside something metal screeched as it tore loose and went tumbling across the frozen ground. Caleb grabbed his heavy coat, the one Sarah had bought him for their last Christmas together, and shrugged it on. Whatever had come loose could do serious damage if it hit the barn or one of the outbuildings. He pulled on his insulated boots, wrapped a scarf around his face, and grabbed the high-powered flashlight from its charging station. Then, as an afterthought born from years of living alone in wild country, he pulled his Remington 870 shotgun from the rack by the door and loaded it with double-aught buck. You didn't go wandering around a Montana ranch at midnight in a blizzard without protection. Mountain lions came down from the high country when food got scarce. Wolves traveled in packs. And more than once, he'd had to scare off opportunistic thieves who thought an isolated ranch made for easy pickings. The moment he opened the door, the wind tried to rip it from his hands. Snow stung his face like buckshot, finding every gap in his clothing, every exposed inch of skin. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Caleb lowered his head and pushed forward into the maelstrom. The barn sat 200 yards from the house. It might as well have been 2 miles. Visibility was maybe 10 feet on a good minute, less than 5 when the wind really picked up. Caleb knew every inch of this land, could walk it blind if he had to, but the storm transformed familiar ground into alien territory. Snowdrifts hid fence posts and equipment. The beam of his flashlight barely penetrated the swirling white chaos. He kept the shotgun tucked under one arm, finger off the trigger, but ready. The wind was so loud he couldn't hear anything else. Not his own footsteps, not his labored breathing, nothing but that endless howling scream. Halfway to the barn, his boot caught on something buried in the snow. He stumbled, nearly went down, caught himself at the last second. His flashlight beam swung wild, and for just a moment, he thought he saw movement near the barn door. Caleb froze, brought the light back around. Nothing, just snow and shadows and the violent dance of the storm. But something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, that old instinct from his army days kicking in. The same instinct that had kept him alive in Kandahar and Fallujah, that had made him hit the dirt half a second before the mortars fell. Someone was here, on his land, in his barn. Caleb approached the rest of the way with the shotgun raised and ready, moving slow despite the killing cold. The barn door, a massive sliding thing that usually took 2 men to move, stood open about 3 feet. Fresh snow had piled inside the gap, but he could see disturbed snow leading in. Footprints. Multiple sets. Small ones. His finger moved to the trigger. "This is private property," he shouted, though his voice barely carried over the wind. "I'm armed, and I will defend what's mine." No response. Just the scream of the blizzard and the creak of old wood under tons of snow. Caleb took a breath, tasted ice and fear, and slipped through the gap into the barn. The darkness inside was total. His flashlight beam cut through it like a knife, illuminating familiar shapes, hay bales stacked to the ceiling, his ancient John Deere tractor, tools hanging on the walls, the empty cattle stalls. Most of his herd was in the winter pasture, sheltered in a draw 2 miles north. Only the pregnant cows and the bulls were kept close during storms like this. The beam swept across the floor, picking up more footprints in the dust and scattered hay. Definitely multiple people, leading deeper into the barn toward the back where he kept feed and equipment. "Last warning," Caleb called out. "Show yourselves or I start shooting." That's when he heard it, barely audible over the storm. A child's whimper, quickly hushed. Every muscle in Caleb's body went rigid. A child? Out here? In this? He moved forward, slower now, flashlight and shotgun moving in tandem. His heart hammered against his ribs. The temperature inside the barn was maybe 20 degrees warmer than outside, which meant it was still well below freezing, deadly cold for anyone without proper shelter. The whimpering came from behind a wall of stacked hay bales in the far corner. Caleb circled around, gun raised, and what he saw in his flashlight beam made his blood freeze colder than the Montana night. A woman stood pressed against the wall, her back to the corner, arms spread wide like she was trying to shield something behind her. Even in the harsh beam of the flashlight, Caleb could see the blood. It soaked her left shoulder, dark and glistening, spreading across her torn jacket. Her face was ghostly pale, her lips blue with cold. Dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. Her eyes, wild with desperation and defiance, locked onto him. But it was what huddled behind her that truly stopped him cold. Children. 7 of them. Ranging from maybe 4 years old to early teens. They clung to each other in a tight cluster, their faces masks of pure terror, their clothes inadequate for the brutal cold. Frost clung to their hair. Their lips were blue. They were shaking so violently Caleb could see it from 15 feet away. "Please." The woman's voice came out as barely more than a rasp. She swayed on her feet, barely able to stand, but she kept her arms spread wide, keeping herself between Caleb and the children. "Please don't hurt them. They're just children." Caleb's shotgun wavered. His mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. Who were these people? How did they get here? Why were they hiding in his barn in the worst blizzard Montana had seen in 50 years? "Ma'am, I'm not. I'll leave." Her words tumbled out fast, desperate. "I'll take them and we'll go. Just give us a few minutes to get warm. Please. They're so cold. They're so cold and I can't lose any more of them." She took a step forward, staggered, and Caleb saw the full extent of her injury. The blood wasn't just on her shoulder. It ran down her arm, dripped from her fingertips, left a dark trail in the hay at her feet. Jesus Christ, Caleb breathed. You've been shot. It doesn't matter. But her voice cracked on the words, and she swayed again, her knees buckling. One of the older children, a girl maybe 13 or 14, grabbed her arm, tried to hold her up. Miss Evelyn, please, the girl whispered. You have to sit down. No. The woman, Evelyn, straightened with visible effort. Her eyes never left Caleb, never left his gun. No, we have to. He'll find us. He's coming. He's always coming. Caleb slowly lowered the shotgun, though he didn't put it down. Who's coming? Who did this to you? Evelyn's laugh was bitter and broken. Does it matter? He owns this county. He owns half the state. No one stops him. No one can stop him. Behind her, one of the smaller children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5, began to cry softly. The sound was heartbreaking, muffled against another child's shoulder. Caleb looked at them, really looked at them. 7 children, all different ages, different features, not siblings. The terror in their faces wasn't just from the cold, or even from him. It was deeper than that, older. The kind of fear that came from prolonged trauma, and the woman standing guard over them, bleeding from a gunshot wound, ready to collapse but still standing between them and any perceived threat. Something in Caleb's chest cracked, some ice he'd thought was permanent. How long have you been out in this storm? He asked quietly. Evelyn blinked, confused by the question. Since this afternoon. We had to walk. Couldn't risk the roads. He'd find us on the roads. That's 9 hours. Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. 9 hours in 30 below temperatures. How are any of you still alive? I don't know. Evelyn's defiance was crumbling, exhaustion taking over. I don't know. We just kept walking, had to keep walking, for them. Caleb made a decision. The kind of decision that he'd have plenty of time to second-guess later, but in that moment felt like the only decision he could make. He propped the shotgun against a hay bale and raised his empty hands. I'm going to help you, he said. Evelyn shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. He'll come here. If we stay, he'll come here and he'll... I don't care. The words came out harder than Caleb intended, echoing in the barn. I don't care who he is or what he thinks he can do. You and these kids are about 20 minutes from freezing to death, maybe less. So you can trust me and let me help you, or you can walk back out into that storm and die. Your choice. The two of them stared at each other across the space of the barn. Caleb could see her weighing options, calculating risks, fighting against instincts that screamed not to trust anyone. Then her legs gave out. She went down hard, crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. The children cried out, surged forward to catch her, but she was already on the ground, blood pooling beneath her shoulder. Caleb moved without thinking, training taking over. He dropped to his knees beside her, pressed his hand against the wound to slow the bleeding. The fabric of her jacket was frozen stiff, crusted with ice and blood. Stay with me, he ordered, his voice taking on the tone he'd used with wounded soldiers a lifetime ago. Keep your eyes open. Look at me. Evelyn's eyes fluttered. The children, she whispered. Please. The children. I've got them. I've got all of you, but you have to stay awake. He looked up at the 7 frightened faces surrounding him. The oldest girl, the one who'd called Evelyn by name, had tears streaming down her cheeks, but she stood straight, holding 2 smaller children against her sides. What's your name? Caleb asked her. Madison, she stammered. Madison, I need your help. Can you be brave for me? The girl nodded, though she was shaking almost as hard as the woman bleeding on his barn floor. Good. I need you to take the other kids to that door over there. He pointed to the side entrance that led directly toward the house. Stay right inside. Don't go out into the storm, but get ready to move fast. Can you do that? Is Miss Evelyn going to die? One of the smaller boys asked, his voice high and terrified. Caleb looked down at the woman who'd used her own body to shield 7 children from a Montana blizzard. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow. She'd lost a lot of blood. Without proper medical attention, she'd be dead before sunrise. Not if I can help it, he said. But I need you all to do exactly what I say. Can you do that? 7 heads nodded in unison. Go, now! Madison herded the younger ones toward the door, throwing worried glances over her shoulder. Caleb waited until they were out of earshot, then looked down at Evelyn. "This is going to hurt," he told her, "but I need to stop the bleeding before I move you." He pulled off his scarf and wadded it against the wound, pressing hard. Evelyn's eyes flew open and she gasped, her body going rigid with pain. "That's good," Caleb said, though his voice was gentler now. "Stay with me." "What's your full name?" "Evelyn. Evelyn Price." "Evelyn Price, who shot you?" Her eyes lost focus for a moment. Doesn't matter. He'll kill us all. When he finds us, he'll kill all of us." "Like hell he will." Caleb secured the makeshift bandage as best he could. "Nobody's dying tonight. Not on my watch. Not on my land." He slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees and one supporting her back, careful to avoid the injured shoulder. She weighed next to nothing, all bones and determination. "The children," she said again, her voice fading, "are coming with us. All of them. Now stop talking and save your strength." Caleb stood, lifting her easily despite his own exhaustion. Her head lolled against his chest. He could feel how cold she was even through his thick coat, feel her shivering against him. He carried her to where the children waited. They pressed against each other like frightened animals, their eyes huge in the darkness. "Listen carefully," Caleb said, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. "We're going to the house. It's going to be cold and it's going to be hard, but we have to move fast. Hold hands. Don't let go of each other no matter what. Madison, you take the rear. I'll lead. If someone falls, you scream as loud as you can. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Madison said, her voice steadier than he'd expected. "Good girl. Let's move." Caleb kicked open the side door and stepped back out into hell. The wind had somehow gotten worse. The temperature dropped even further. Snow lashed at them like frozen razors. Caleb ducked his head and pushed forward, trusting the children to follow. He couldn't hear them over the storm, couldn't look back to check on them without risking dropping Evelyn. He just had to trust, had to have faith that they'd keep up. The walk that should have taken 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. The cold was vicious, attacking every exposed inch of skin, finding its way through every gap in his clothing. Evelyn had stopped shivering in his arms, which was a very bad sign. Hypothermia's final stage, when the body stopped trying to warm itself. Caleb's boot hit the first porch step, and he nearly cried with relief. He took the stairs 2 at a time, kicked the door open, and stumbled into the blessed warmth of his house. Heat hit him like a wall. The generator was still running, still feeding power to his backup heating system. The temperature inside was maybe 65 degrees, not warm by most standards, but after the killing cold outside, it felt like heaven. He turned to look back out the door, his heart in his throat. 7 small shapes emerged from the blizzard, still holding hands, Madison bringing up the rear just like he'd told her. They stumbled up the steps and through the door, and Caleb kicked it shut behind them. For a moment, nobody moved. They just stood there, dripping melting snow onto his floor, breathing hard, alive. Then Caleb's training kicked back in. "Madison, help the little ones out of their wet clothes. Anything that's soaked needs to come off. There's blankets in the chest by the couch. Wrap up and get warm. There's a bathroom down that hall if anyone needs it. Water's still running." He carried Evelyn through to his bedroom, the room he hadn't slept in since Sarah died, the room he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He laid her on the bed, on Sarah's side, and for just a moment the past crashed over him with crushing weight. Then he shook it off. There'd be time for Ghost later. Right now, he had a woman bleeding to death in his bed. Caleb grabbed his first aid kit from the bathroom. The serious one. The one he'd put together during his army days and never quite gotten rid of. Trauma shears, hemostatic gauze, pressure bandages, the works. He cut away Evelyn's jacket and the layers beneath until he could see the wound. The bullet had gone clean through her shoulder, missing the major arteries but tearing through muscle. She'd been incredibly lucky. A few inches to the right, and it would have hit her subclavian artery. She'd have bled out in minutes. As it was, she was still in serious danger. Caleb worked fast, cleaning the wound, packing it with hemostatic gauze to encourage clotting, securing it with pressure bandages. Evelyn drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally crying out when he had to probe the wound, but mostly just lying still and pale against his pillows. When he'd done all he could, he covered her with every blanket he could find. Her lips were still blue, her skin still too cold, severe hypothermia on top of blood loss. The next few hours would tell the tale. Caleb stood back, looking down at the stranger in his bed. This woman who'd taken a bullet for 7 children who weren't her own, who'd walked 9 hours through a blizzard, who even now, unconscious and half dead, had her arms positioned like she was still trying to shield someone. "Who are you, Evelyn Price?" he murmured. "And what kind of devil are you running from?" A small sound from the doorway made him turn. The youngest boy stood there, maybe 5 years old, swimming in a blanket 3 times too big for him. His eyes were red from crying, but he'd stopped shaking. "Is she going to be okay?" the boy asked in a tiny voice. Caleb found himself kneeling down, getting to the child's level. "I hope so, buddy. She's pretty tough." "She saved us." The boy's lip trembled. "She saved all of us. He was gonna do bad things, but Miss Evelyn said no, and she took us away." Ice formed in Caleb's gut. Who was gonna do bad things? But the boy just shook his head, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "I'm not supposed to talk about it. He said if we ever talked about it, he'd... Hey, Caleb gentled his voice. "It's okay. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. You're safe here, I promise." It was a promise he had no business making, knowing nothing about their situation. But looking into that child's terrified eyes, Caleb couldn't bring himself to care. The boy nodded, wiped his nose on the blanket. "My name's Tommy." "Tommy, that's a good name. I'm Caleb. Are you going to make us leave when the storm stops?" The question hit Caleb harder than it should have. "Do you have somewhere else to go?" Tommy shook his head. "Then I guess you're staying here for now." The relief that flooded the boy's face was almost painful to witness. Caleb stood, ruffled Tommy's hair awkwardly. He'd never been good with kids, never had any of his own, and sent him back to the others. Alone again with an unconscious woman and a building storm, Caleb walked to the window and looked out into the white fury beyond. Somewhere out there, maybe miles away, maybe closer, was the man Evelyn feared. The man who'd shot her. The man who'd done something so terrible that a woman would rather risk death in a blizzard than stay near him. Caleb checked the Remington, made sure it was fully loaded, and set it against the wall where he could reach it quickly. "Come on then," he said to the storm, to the darkness, to whoever might be listening. "I've got nothing left to lose anyway." Outside, the wind howled its answer, and somewhere in the distance a wolf called out into the frozen night. The bleeding woman and 7 children had been in his barn for less than an hour, but Caleb Holt could already feel it, the way the earth shifts beneath your feet just before everything changes forever. His lonely, quiet existence was over. Whatever came next would be written in blood and snow and the desperate courage of strangers who'd chosen his doorstep to make their stand. Caleb pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down to keep watch. He didn't know if Evelyn Price would survive the night. Didn't know who was hunting her or when they'd come. Didn't know if he was about to make the stupidest decision of his life or the only decision that mattered. All he knew was that Sarah would have done the same thing. She'd have opened the door, brought them in from the cold, stood between the helpless and those who'd hurt them. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb felt like he might understand why he was still alive, why he'd survived war and loss and 3 years of slow dying on this frozen ranch. Maybe it was for this moment, this night, these people. Outside the window, the blizzard raged on, covering the world in white. Inside, in the warmth and the quiet, 7 children slept wrapped in blankets, and a wounded woman fought for her life. And Caleb Holt, who thought his heart had frozen solid the day he buried his wife, felt something crack and shift in his chest. Not quite warmth, not yet hope, but maybe, just maybe, the first thaw of something that had been winter for far too long. Dawn came late and gray, the kind of colorless morning that made it hard to tell whether the sun had risen at all. The blizzard had finally exhausted itself sometime around 5 a.m., leaving behind a world transformed into an alien landscape of white. Snow had drifted against the house in waves that reached nearly to the second-story windows. The barn was half buried. Every fence post, every tree, every familiar landmark had been reshaped into something strange and new. Caleb had watched it all happen from his vigil beside the bed, tracking the storm's progress through the window while monitoring Evelyn's breathing. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time he'd started to drift off, his mind conjured images of armed men appearing out of the snow, of the children's terrified faces, of Evelyn's blood spreading across his barn floor. She'd made it through the night, though it had been close. Twice her breathing had grown so shallow he'd thought he'd lost her. Twice he'd had to rouse her, force her to stay conscious, keep her from slipping away into the cold darkness that wanted to claim her. Now, as weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, her color had improved slightly. The blue tinge had left her lips. Her skin, while still too pale, no longer had that grayish cast of impending death. The blankets rose and fell with steady, if shallow, breaths. Caleb stood, his joints protesting after hours in the chair. He was 53 years old and felt every year of it this morning. His back ached, his eyes burned with exhaustion, and his mouth tasted like old coffee and poor decisions. He needed to check on the children, needed to assess the situation in the clear light of day, needed to figure out what the hell he was going to do with 8 refugees who'd appeared out of a blizzard with a killer on their trail. The living room was a disaster zone of discarded wet clothing, empty blankets, and sleeping children. They'd arranged themselves in a tight cluster on and around his couch, the older ones positioned protectively around the younger. Madison had one arm draped over Tommy, the other holding a girl of maybe 7. 2 boys who looked like twins, maybe 10 years old, had claimed the floor in front of the couch. Another girl, 9 or so, was curled in the armchair. The oldest boy, maybe 12, had positioned himself by the door, even in sleep maintaining some kind of guard. They looked so small, so vulnerable. Whatever they'd been through had taught them to sleep like soldiers, light and ready to wake at any sound. The kind of sleep that never truly rested. Caleb moved quietly to the kitchen, started a pot of coffee on his camp stove. The power was still out from the main lines, though his generator kept the essentials running. While the coffee percolated, he took inventory of his supplies. Food wasn't going to be a problem in the short term. He kept a well-stocked pantry, old habits from growing up in a place where you could get snowed in for weeks at a time. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, pasta, flour, a freezer full of beef from last fall's butchering, enough to feed 8 people for a month if he rationed carefully. But that assumed they'd be here for a month. That assumed whoever was hunting them wouldn't show up before then. That assumed a lot of things Caleb couldn't be sure of. He was pouring his first cup of coffee when Madison appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving silent as a ghost. She wore one of his old flannel shirts like a dress, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times. Her dark hair was tangled, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something older than her years. "You're up early," Caleb said quietly, mindful of the other children still sleeping. "Couldn't sleep." Madison moved to the window, looked out at the transformed landscape. "I kept thinking he'd come, that I'd hear trucks, footsteps, something." "Who is he, Madison?" Caleb asked. "Who's hunting you?" The girl's shoulders tensed. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, "His name is Marcus Garrett. He owns things. People say he owns half of Montana, maybe more." The name hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. Marcus Garrett. Everyone in Montana knew that name. Real estate developer, rancher, businessman, political kingmaker. The kind of man who had governors and senators on speed dial. The kind of wealth and power that made him functionally untouchable. "Marcus Garrett," Caleb repeated slowly. "The Marcus Garrett?" Madison nodded, still staring out the window. "He has a compound about 50 miles north of here, up in the mountains. That's where we were. That's where Miss Evelyn found us." Caleb's mind raced. 50 miles through mountain terrain in a blizzard. They must have been traveling for days before they reached his barn. "What were you doing at Garrett's compound?" "Living there." Madison's voice went flat, dead. "Some of us for months, some for years. He collects children. That's what Miss Evelyn said. He collects us like other people collect art." The coffee in Caleb's stomach turned to acid. "Your parents don't exist, not for most of us." Madison finally turned from the window, and Caleb saw tears tracking down her face, though her voice remained steady. "Tommy's mom died of an overdose. The twins, Jacob and Jason, were in foster care until they aged out. Sarah, that's the girl in the armchair, her parents sold her to pay off debts. The others, Similar stories. Throwaways, nobodies. That's what Garrett called us. Said nobody would look for nobodies. Caleb had to grip the counter to stay standing. And Evelyn? Where does she fit in? She worked for him, was supposed to manage us. Keep us quiet, keep us obedient. Madison's hands clenched into fists. But she's not like him. She's not. She saw what was happening, and she couldn't be part of it anymore. What was happening, Madison? The girl shook her head violently. I can't. If I talk about it, if anyone knows I talked about it, he can't hurt you here. Caleb heard the words come out of his mouth and wondered if they were a lie. Could he really protect these kids from a man like Marcus Garrett? A man with that kind of money and power? You don't understand, Madison's voice cracked. He can do anything. He has judges, police, politicians. Last year, a reporter started asking questions about his compound. She died in a car accident 3 days later. Single vehicle collision on a clear day. They ruled it an accident, but everyone knew. Everyone always knows, but nobody ever does anything because he's Marcus Garrett, and people like him don't face consequences. A small sound from the living room made them both turn. Tommy stood there, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his blanket dragging on the floor behind him. I smell coffee, the little boy said. Can kids have coffee? The moment of tension broke. Caleb found himself almost smiling despite everything. How about hot chocolate instead? We have hot chocolate. Tommy's eyes went wide like Caleb had just offered him the moon. I think I can manage that. Over the next hour, the other children woke one by one, drawn by the smell of food and the promise of warmth. Caleb cooked breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, the works. He wasn't much of a cook, but you couldn't grow up on a Montana ranch without learning how to make a decent meal. They ate like they'd been starving, which they probably had been. Caleb watched them shovel food into their mouths with single-minded intensity, barely pausing to breathe. Madison tried to maintain some semblance of manners, reminding the younger ones to chew, to slow down, but even she ate with desperate hunger. When was the last time you all had a proper meal? Caleb asked. The children exchanged glances. Finally, Jacob, or was it Jason, said, Mr. Garrett didn't believe in wasting good food on us. We got enough to keep us working. That's what he said. Caleb had to turn away, pretend to be busy at the stove so they wouldn't see his face. The rage that filled him was white-hot and dangerous, the kind of anger he hadn't felt since Afghanistan, since the day his convoy hit an IED and he'd watched good men die for no reason at all. He served them seconds, then thirds, let them eat until the hollow look started to leave their eyes. Mr. Holt? Sarah, the 9-year-old, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. Is Miss Evelyn going to be okay? All 7 children stopped eating, focused on him with an intensity that made his chest tight. I think so, Caleb said carefully. She's stable. Her fever's down. The bleeding stopped. But she needs rest. Lots of rest. And probably a real doctor. No doctors. Madison's voice was sharp. No hospitals. They have to report gunshot wounds. The police would come. And the police work for Garrett, Caleb finished. Yeah, I'm getting that picture. So what do we do? Asked the oldest boy, speaking for the first time. His name was Daniel, Caleb had learned. 13 years old with eyes that had seen too much. Caleb poured himself another cup of coffee, bought himself time to think. What could they do? They were trapped by the snow. Even with his truck's 4-wheel drive, there was no way they were getting through those drifts anytime soon. The main roads wouldn't be plowed for days, not this far out. The county always prioritized the highways and the town roads first, which meant they had time, but also meant they were sitting ducks if Garrett figured out where they were. First thing we do is secure the perimeter, Caleb said, falling back on military thinking because it was familiar and concrete. Madison, Daniel, you're with me. We need to check the barn. Make sure nothing got damaged in the storm. The rest of you stay inside. Stay warm. If you see or hear anything unusual, you come find me immediately. Understood? 7 heads nodded in unison. 20 minutes later, Caleb was trudging through waist-deep snow toward the barn, Madison and Daniel struggling to keep up behind him. The cold was brutal, but not deadly like last night. The temperature had climbed all the way up to maybe 10 above zero, positively balmy by blizzard standards. The barn had survived intact, though snow had drifted through the open door and covered everything in a white blanket. Caleb's cattle were fine, huddled together for warmth in their stalls, unconcerned about the drama of the previous night. It was Daniel who found the blood. "Mr. Holt?" The boy's voice was tight. "You need to see this." Caleb followed him to where they'd found Evelyn and the children. The hay bales still showed the impressions of small bodies, but it was the wall behind them that made Caleb's blood run cold. Someone had carved words into the wooden planks. Deep gouges, probably made with a knife or something similar. The letters were crude but readable. "We see you. We always see you. There is no running." "He did that," Madison whispered. "Before we came here, he carved it into the walls of every room where we slept, so we'd never forget, never feel safe." Caleb stared at those words, at the psychological torture they represented, and felt something harden in his chest, a decision crystallizing into certainty. "We're going to need to fortify," he said quietly. "Board up the windows we don't need for light. Make sure every door has a solid lock. Set up a watch rotation." "You're preparing for a siege," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "I'm preparing to defend what's mine, and right now you seven and Miss Evelyn, you're under my protection. That makes you mine." They spent the rest of the morning working. Caleb showed the kids how to nail boards across the lower windows, how to stack furniture to create barriers, how to set up lines of sight to cover all the approaches to the house. They were quick learners, attentive, and careful. The kind of careful that came from knowing mistakes could be fatal. Around noon, Caleb heard a sound from his bedroom. He found Evelyn awake, trying to sit up, her face twisted with pain and determination. "Easy," he said, moving to help her. "You're going to tear your stitches." "The children," her voice was raw. "Where are the children?" "Safe. They're all safe. Here in the house." Evelyn's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap. When she didn't find it, some of the tension left her body and she sagged back against the pillows. "How long have I been out?" "About 12 hours. You lost a lot of blood. Another hour in that barn and you'd have been dead." "Maybe that would have been better." The words were bitter. "At least then he couldn't use me to get to them." Caleb pulled up the chair he'd spent the night in. "Madison told me about Garrett, about what he was doing." Evelyn's laugh was broken. "Madison told you some of it. She doesn't know the worst of it. I made sure of that. Made sure the younger ones especially were kept away from—" She trailed off, closed her eyes. "I was supposed to be their guardian, their caretaker, and instead I was complicit in their imprisonment." "But you got them out. 6 months too late, a year too late. Some of them have been with him for years and I did nothing. I followed orders and collected my paycheck and told myself it wasn't my problem." "What changed?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Tommy. 3 weeks ago, Garrett started paying special attention to Tommy. The way he'd look at him, talk to him. I'd seen that look before with the others, and I knew what was coming, what he planned to do. And I couldn't be part of that. Not anymore. Not ever again." Caleb felt sick. "So you ran." "I grabbed whoever I could reach and we ran. Middle of the night. I knew the security codes, knew the patrol schedules. We made it almost 10 miles before they realized we were gone. That's when—" She gestured to her shoulder. "One of the guards. He had a clear shot at Tommy. I got in the way." "You took a bullet for a child who isn't even yours." "They're all mine now." Evelyn's eyes blazed with sudden fierce intensity. "Every single one of them. I might have failed them before, but I won't fail them again. I'll die before I let him take them back." "It won't come to that." Caleb surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. "We'll figure this out." "How?" "You don't know what you're up against. Marcus Garrett doesn't lose, ever. He's been doing this for years, maybe decades. Taking children nobody will miss, using them however he wants. And nobody stops him because he's too rich, too connected, too powerful. Then we make him face consequences for the first time in his life." Evelyn stared at him like he was insane. "With what? Your shotgun and good intentions? He has private security, ex-military, most of them. He has the law on his side. You're one man on an isolated ranch. What can you possibly do against that? Caleb stood, moved to the window, looked out at his land buried in snow. You're right. I'm just one man, but this is my land, my home. And I've got something Garrett doesn't. What's that? Nothing left to lose. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn studied him with new eyes, seeing him properly for the first time. Who are you? She asked quietly. Really? Nobody special, just a widowed rancher who's been waiting 3 years to find a reason to care about something again. Caleb turned from the window. Get some rest. Build your strength. We're going to need it. He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. In the living room, he found all 7 children gathered around Madison, who was reading to them from a battered copy of a book she must have carried with her through the storm. Her voice was soft but steady, weaving a story of adventure and hope. The younger ones were transfixed, their faces showing wonder instead of fear for the first time since they'd arrived. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching them, and felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. These kids who'd been through hell, who'd learned to fear instead of trust, to expect pain instead of kindness, who'd probably never known what it felt like to be safe. He couldn't give them much, but he could give them that, for however long it lasted. His satellite phone sat on the kitchen counter, and Caleb found himself staring at it. He could call for help. Sheriff's Department, State Police, FBI even. But Madison's words echoed in his mind. He has judges, police, politicians. Everyone always knows, but nobody ever does anything. And there was the reporter who died in that convenient accident. Number. Official channels were out. Anyone he called might be on Garrett's payroll, might tip him off, might make things worse instead of better, which left Caleb on his own. 1 man and 8 refugees against whatever Marcus Garrett decided to throw at them. The odds weren't good, probably suicidal if he was being honest with himself. But Caleb had faced long odds before, had learned a long time ago that sometimes the only thing you could do was stand your ground and make the enemy pay for every inch. He checked the Remington again, pulled his old service rifle from the safe, an AR-15 he'd kept from his Army days, properly registered and legal, but still deadly effective. Counted his ammunition, not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough to make a stand if it came to that. The afternoon passed in strange domesticity. The children, once fed and warmed and convinced they were at least temporarily safe, started to relax. The twins found a deck of cards and taught the younger ones some game that involved a lot of shouting and laughter. Sarah discovered Caleb's ancient collection of VHS tapes and convinced him to set up the old TV. It was Daniel who asked the question Caleb had been dreading. Mr. Holt? What happens when the snow melts, when the roads are clear? All the children stopped what they were doing, turned to look at him, waiting for an answer he didn't have. I don't know, Caleb said honestly, but we'll figure it out, together. You don't have to do this, Madison said quietly. We're not your responsibility. You could just, when the road's clear, you could drive us to the next town. Drop us off. Forget you ever saw us. Could I? Caleb looked at each of them in turn. Could I really do that? Just hand you over to a system that failed to protect you in the first place? Hope that maybe this time someone will actually care? It would be safer for you, Daniel pointed out. Garrett will come, maybe not today or tomorrow, but he'll come. And when he does, he'll find that some things can't be bought. Some people can't be threatened, and some lines you don't cross without paying the price. That night, after the children were asleep and Evelyn had managed to eat some broth, Caleb stood on his porch in the freezing dark. The stars were out, brilliant and cold, the kind of stars you only saw in country this remote. The snow-covered landscape glowed silver in the moonlight. It was beautiful, deadly and beautiful, like Montana had always been. Somewhere out there, 50 miles through those mountains, Marcus Garrett was probably planning his next move, calling in favors, mobilizing resources. A man like that didn't let his property escape without consequences. And that's what Evelyn and the children were to him, property. Things to be owned and controlled and used however he saw fit. Caleb had met men like Garrett before. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, In a dozen different war zones, men who thought power made them untouchable, who thought money meant they could do whatever they wanted. He'd learned how to deal with men like that, learned that they bled like anyone else when you stood up to them. The sound of the door opening made him turn. Evelyn stood there, leaning heavily against the frame, wrapped in blankets. She shouldn't have been out of bed. "You should be resting," Caleb said. "I've rested enough." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the same stars. "I need to know. Why are you doing this? Really? You don't know us. We brought danger to your door. Most people would have called the police and washed their hands of the whole thing." "I'm not most people." "That's not an answer." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. 3 years ago, I watched my wife die. Cancer ate her alive, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. For 3 years, I've been living in this house like a ghost, going through the motions, waiting to die myself. And now? Now I've got something worth living for again. Something worth fighting for. 7 kids who deserve better than what life's handed them. And a woman brave enough to take a bullet for strangers. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "We might all die. You understand that, right? When Garrett comes, if he comes, he'll find out that this ranch has survived 4 generations of Holtz because we know how to defend what's ours." Caleb met her gaze. "I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying everyone's going to make it through, but I am saying that I'm done running from things, done hiding from life. We can't stay here forever. No, but we can stay here long enough to figure out a plan. Long enough to gather evidence. Long enough to find someone who isn't on Garrett's payroll who might actually listen." "You really think that's possible?" "I think it has to be. Because the alternative is letting men like him win. And I'm tired of watching bad people get away with terrible things just because they have money and power." They stood together in the cold, 2 broken people who'd found each other in a blizzard. Behind them, in the warmth of the house, 7 children slept peacefully for maybe the first time in months or years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, they were safe. And sometimes, Caleb thought, that was enough. The peace lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days of strange, cautious domesticity. 4 days of children learning to laugh again. Of Evelyn healing. Of Caleb remembering what it felt like to have life in his house. 4 days of almost believing they might actually get away with it. Then, on the 5th morning, Daniel spotted the trucks. "Mr. Holt." The boy's voice was eerily calm, but his face had gone white as the snow outside. "They're here." Caleb had been teaching Madison how to load the Remington, against Evelyn's protests, but he'd insisted that everyone old enough needed to know how to defend themselves. He set the gun down carefully and moved to the window where Daniel stood. 3 black SUVs were making their way up the long drive to his ranch. Moving slow but steady, their heavy winter tires chewing through the snow that had kept the roads impassable for days. Someone had plowed. Someone with the resources to clear 10 miles of private mountain road in the middle of nowhere. Someone like Marcus Garrett. "Get everyone to the safe room," Caleb said quietly. "Now." He'd spent the last 4 days preparing for this moment. The root cellar beneath the kitchen, accessible through a trapdoor hidden under the old rug. He'd stocked it with food, water, blankets. If things went bad, the children could hide there for days. Madison herded the younger ones toward the kitchen without question. They'd practiced this drill twice a day, every day. Even Tommy knew not to argue, not to cry, just to move fast and quiet. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, still pale but stronger now. Her arm was in a sling, but she could move. "I should be the one to talk to him." "Like hell. He wants me. He wants them. Maybe if I turn myself over." "Nobody's turning themselves over to anyone." Caleb checked his rifle, made sure there was a round chambered. "Get in the cellar with the kids. I won't hide while you'll do exactly what I tell you because those children need someone who'll survive to take care of them if this goes sideways." Caleb's voice was hard. "I'm expendable." "You're not. Now move." For a moment he thought she'd argue. Then she nodded once, quick and sharp, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Caleb positioned himself at the front window, rifle across his knees, and waited. The SUVs rolled to a stop about 50 yards from the house. far enough that they were out of easy rifle range, close enough to make their presence felt. The doors opened and men emerged. 6 of them, all built like linebackers, all moving with the practiced ease of trained operators. Ex-military, just like Evelyn had said. They wore expensive winter gear and carried weapons they didn't bother to conceal. The last man out of the center vehicle was different. Older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked good on campaign posters. Handsome in that weathered, distinguished way. Expensive coat, custom boots, the bearing of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Marcus Garrett. Had to be. He stood there in Caleb's yard like he owned it, like he owned everything his eyes touched, and smiled. Caleb opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. The cold hit him like a fist, but he didn't flinch, didn't show weakness. "This is private property," he called out. "You're trespassing." Garrett's smile widened. "Mr. Holt, I presume." "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Marcus Garrett. Perhaps you've heard of me." "Can't say that I have." The lie hung in the frozen air. Garrett's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He wasn't used to being dismissed. "Well, I'm here on a rather delicate matter. I'm missing some property, 7 children and a former employee. I have reason to believe they might have taken shelter here during that terrible storm." Property. Caleb let the word hang there, flat and ugly. "Children under my legal guardianship," Garrett amended smoothly. "And an employee who violated her contract and endangered them by taking them out in dangerous conditions. I'm sure you understand my concern. What I understand is that you're standing in my yard with 6 armed men, threatening me on my own land." "Threatening?" Garrett spread his hands in a gesture of innocence that fooled absolutely no one. "Mr. Holt, I'm simply trying to retrieve what belongs to me. Surely you can appreciate that. Man to man, rancher to rancher." "I'm not a rancher anymore. I'm just a man who doesn't like being lied to." Caleb shifted his grip on the rifle, subtle but deliberate. "Those aren't your children. They're not your property. And that woman you shot, she's not your employee." Garrett's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to get colder. "I see. And how exactly would you know any of this?" "Because they told me every word of what you did to them, what you plan to keep doing. The fantasies of traumatized children and a mentally unstable woman." Garrett's voice remained smooth, reasonable. "Surely you're aware that I've spent years providing care for disadvantaged youth, that my charitable foundation has helped hundreds of children. One disturbed employee steals 7 of my wards in the middle of the night, feeds them lies, and suddenly I'm the villain? You shot her." "My security team attempted to stop a kidnapping in progress. In the dark, in the chaos, accidents happen. I deeply regret that Miss Price was injured, but she brought it on herself through her reckless actions." Caleb had to admire the performance. Garrett had an answer for everything, every word carefully chosen, every gesture calculated. This was a man who'd been talking his way out of consequences his entire life. "Here's how this is going to work," Garrett continued, his tone still friendly but with steel underneath. "You're going to bring those children out here. I'm going to take them home where they belong. And we're all going to forget this unfortunate incident ever occurred. In fact, I'm prepared to be generous. Say $50,000 for your trouble? Call it compensation for sheltering them during the storm." "Not interested." $100,000 then, cash, no questions asked." "The answer's no." Garrett's smile thinned. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Holt. I have the law on my side. I have documentation showing I'm their legal guardian. You have nothing but the word of a disturbed woman and some scared children. If I make one phone call, the sheriff will be here within the hour to arrest you for kidnapping." "Then make the call." The 2 men stared at each other across the snow-covered yard. Behind Garrett, his security team shifted, hands moving closer to their weapons. Caleb kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. 6 trained operators against 1 aging soldier. The math wasn't good. But he had the high ground. He knew every inch of this land, and more importantly, he had something to fight for that went beyond money or pride. "You really want to die for strangers?" Garrett asked, and the friendly mask finally slipped. What showed beneath was cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. "Because that's what's going to happen here if you don't give me what I want." My men are professionals, former special forces. They'll go through you like tissue paper. Maybe. But I'm betting I can take at least 3 of them with me. Maybe 4 if I'm lucky. Caleb's voice was conversational. And you're standing close enough to your boys that there's a good chance one of my bullets finds you instead. So the question is, are you willing to die for your property? Garrett's jaw tightened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. I've killed before, Caleb continued quietly. Afghanistan, Iraq. I know what it looks like when a bullet hits a man. Know the sound, the smell. I've made my peace with it. Have you? You're bluffing. Try me. The standoff stretched. Seconds became minutes. The only sound was the wind whistling through the eaves and the idle rumble of the SUV engines. Finally, Garrett smiled again. But this time it was pure venom. You think you've won something here? You think standing on your porch with a gun makes you a hero? I think I'm a man protecting children from a monster. That's enough. I own this county, Holt. I own the judges, the police, the politicians. I own everything and everyone that matters. You? You're nobody. A washed-up soldier playing cowboy on a dying ranch. That washed-up soldier is telling you to get off his land. Garrett took a step forward and one of his security team immediately moved to block him, speaking low and urgent. Whatever he said made Garrett pause, made him look back at Caleb with new eyes, reassessing. Smart hired help, Caleb thought. They recognized another operator when they saw one, recognized someone who wouldn't go down easy. This isn't over, Garrett said. Those children are mine. That woman is mine, and I will have them back. Come try to take them then, but you better bring more men. Garrett stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. It was a terrible sound, completely devoid of humor. You have no idea what you've just done. No idea what's coming for you. I've got a pretty good idea, and I'm still standing here. For now. Garrett turned and walked back to his SUV, moving with the stiff dignity of someone unaccustomed to retreat. His security team backed toward their vehicles, keeping their eyes on Caleb, hands on their weapons. The SUVs started up one by one, but they didn't leave. They repositioned, spreading out in a loose semicircle around the house, far enough to be out of immediate rifle range, close enough to maintain pressure, blocking the only road out. Caleb understood immediately. They weren't leaving. They were settling in for a siege. He backed into the house, keeping his rifle up, and locked the door behind him. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He'd just threatened one of the most powerful men in Montana, had essentially declared war. There was no going back from this. The trapdoor to the root cellar opened and Evelyn climbed out, her face ashen. I heard everything, every word. Then you know we're in deep now. He'll kill you. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were terrified. He'll wait until dark and send his men in, and they'll kill you and take us back, and that's not going to happen. How can you possibly? Because I'm not fighting alone. Caleb moved to the window, checked the positions of the SUVs. And because Garrett made a mistake. What mistake? He came here in person, put himself in the field. That means he's desperate. That means we matter more than he wants to admit. And desperate men make bad decisions. Madison emerged from the cellar, followed by the others. The children's faces were pale but composed. They'd heard it too, Caleb realized. Heard every word through the thin floorboards. Are they going to attack? Daniel asked. Probably, tonight most likely. They'll want darkness on their side. So we have until sunset. The boy's voice was matter-of-fact, almost clinical. What do we do? Caleb looked at these 7 children who'd already survived hell, at the woman who'd sacrificed everything to save them. They were looking at him like he had answers, like he could somehow pull off a miracle. He'd never felt less qualified for anything in his life. We prepare, he said. We turn this house into a fortress. We make them pay for every inch. And we hope that somewhere out there, someone gives a damn. The next hours blurred into frantic activity. Caleb showed Daniel and Madison how to create firing positions. Furniture stacked to provide cover, windows marked for clear lines of sight. He distributed what weapons he had. The Remington for Evelyn despite her injured shoulder, his old hunting rifle for Daniel, his pistol for Madison. The younger children he armed with flare guns and anything else that might work as a deterrent. I can't ask you to do this, he told Evelyn as she practiced cycling rounds one-handed. Can't ask any of you to fight. You're not asking. We're volunteering. Her eyes were hard. I'm done running, done being afraid. If they want us back, they can pry us from this house one body at a time. Tommy tugged on Caleb's sleeve. The little boy's eyes were huge but determined. I can help too. I'm not a baby. Caleb knelt down to the child's level. I know you're not, but your job is different. You and Sarah and the twins, you four are going to be our early warning system. Up in the attic, you'll be able to see them coming before we can. If they move, you signal down to us. Can you do that? Tommy nodded solemnly. We won't let them sneak up. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and red, Caleb made one last check of their defenses. It wasn't much. Furniture barricades, a few weapons, 8 people who had no business being in a firefight, against 6 professional operators with night vision and automatic weapons. The math still wasn't good. Evelyn found him on the back porch, staring out at the mountains. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Your land. I can see why you stayed. Sarah used to say this was where heaven touched the earth. On clear nights, when the stars came out, she'd make me dance with her right here on this porch. Said she could hear music in the wind. Caleb's throat tightened. I thought I'd never hear it again after she died. Thought that part of me died with her. And now? Now I think maybe she'd be proud, that I finally found something worth fighting for. A shout from inside made them both turn. Tommy's voice, high and urgent. They're moving! The trucks are moving! Caleb and Evelyn rushed inside. Through the attic window, they could see all 3 SUVs starting up, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Are they leaving? Madison asked, hope in her voice. No. Daniel had his eye pressed to a pair of binoculars. They're repositioning, spreading out, one to the north, one to the south, one staying on the main approach. Surrounding us, Caleb said grimly, cutting off any escape routes. That means they're coming soon, Evelyn said. As soon as it's full dark. Caleb checked his watch. They had maybe 30 minutes of usable light left. Then the night would belong to Garrett's men. Positions, he ordered. Everyone to your stations. Remember what we practiced. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. Conserve ammunition, and whatever happens, the children in the attic stay hidden. Understood? A chorus of agreement. The children moved to their assigned positions with the calm efficiency of soldiers. It broke Caleb's heart that they had to do this, that he'd put them in this position. But what choice did they have? Surrender meant going back to Garrett, back to whatever hell they'd escaped from. At least here, they had a chance. At least here, they could fight. The last light faded from the sky. Stars emerged, brilliant and cold. The temperature dropped rapidly, plummeting toward 0. Inside the house, they maintained darkness, not wanting to give the attackers easy targets. Caleb stood by the front window, rifle ready, and waited. The attack came at 9:47 p.m. No warning, no demands. Just the sudden crash of glass from the back of the house and the harsh bark of automatic weapons fire. Contact rear! Daniel's voice was steady despite the chaos. His rifle cracked once, twice. More glass breaking. The front door shuddered as something heavy hit it. Caleb fired through the wood, heard a scream, saw a shadow drop. Evelyn was shooting from the kitchen, one-handed and awkward, but effective. 2 on the south side, moving to flank. The house filled with noise, gunfire, shouting, the crash of breaking furniture. Caleb moved from position to position, firing when he had targets, preserving ammunition when he didn't. One of Garrett's men tried to come through a window and caught a face full of buckshot from Madison's position. He went down hard and didn't get up. But there were too many of them. Too many angles to cover. Caleb saw a flash of movement at the kitchen door, turned to fire, but someone else got there first. Evelyn, standing in the doorway with the Remington, her face set in lines of absolute determination. She fired point blank into the attacker, sent him tumbling backward into the snow. Nobody touches my kids, she said, her voice cold as the Montana night. The firefight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but felt like hours. When it finally went quiet, Caleb did a quick count. 3 of Garrett's men down. 2 retreated to the SUVs, 1 status unknown. On their side, Daniel had taken a graze to his arm. One of the windows was completely shot out, furniture destroyed, walls peppered with bullet holes. But they were alive. All of them. Reload, Caleb ordered. Fast. They'll regroup and come again. But the second attack never came. Instead, lights blazed to life, spotlights mounted on the SUVs, flooding the house with harsh white glare. A speaker system crackled to life, and Garrett's voice boomed across the snow. Impressive, Mr. Holt. You've cost me 3 good men. I hope you're proud of yourself. Caleb didn't answer. Didn't give them a target. But you've only delayed the inevitable. I can wait out here all night, all week if necessary. You'll run out of food, run out of ammunition, run out of will, and when you do, I'll be here, waiting, watching. Those children will be mine again. And you'll be just another unfortunate casualty of rural Montana's harsh winters. The speaker clicked off. The lights stayed on, turning night into day, making it impossible to see beyond the glare. Psychological warfare now. Wearing them down, destroying their night vision, making sleep impossible. Smart tactics, effective tactics. Caleb looked around at his battered defenses, at the exhausted faces of the children, at Evelyn standing guard with a shotgun despite her injury. They couldn't win this. Not by force, not by outlasting a siege. Garrett had the resources, the manpower, the time, but maybe they didn't need to win by force. Caleb moved to his office, dug through his desk until he found what he was looking for. His old satellite phone, the military-grade one he'd kept from his Army days. More reliable than any civilian model. More secure. And most importantly, it couldn't be jammed or intercepted like a regular cell phone. He started making calls. The first 3 numbers he tried were disconnected or went to voicemail. Old Army buddies scattered across the country, lost to time and distance. The 4th call connected. Holt? Jesus Christ, is that you? The voice on the other end was rough but familiar. Jake Martinez, his old platoon sergeant. Last Caleb had heard Jake was doing private security contracting somewhere in the Middle East. I need help, Jake. Big trouble. Where are you? Montana. My ranch. I've got 8 civilians under siege by a private army. A guy named Marcus Garrett. A long pause. Marcus Garrett? The developer? Hell, Caleb, you don't mess around when you pick enemies. Can you help or not? I'm in Dubai, brother. Can't exactly hop a flight. Caleb's heart sank. Worth a shot. But I know someone who can. You remember Danny Torres, crazy bastard from 3rd Platoon? Yeah, what about him? He runs a security firm out of Missoula now. Good guys, all former military. They hire out for bodyguard work, investigation, that kind of thing. More importantly, they don't play ball with corrupt locals. Give me 10 minutes to brief him. He'll call you back on this number. Jake, don't thank me yet. You're still surrounded by hostiles. Just try not to die before the cavalry arrives. The line went dead. Caleb made his way back to the others. Madison was bandaging Daniel's arm with steady hands. The younger children were back in their attic position, keeping watch. Evelyn was checking ammunition counts. Was that help? She asked without looking up. Maybe. We'll know soon. And if help doesn't come? Caleb looked out at the lights blazing around them, at the SUVs positioned like wolves around a campfire. Then we make our last stand count for something. The satellite phone rang 18 minutes later. Caleb answered immediately. This is Torres. Martinez says you've got a situation. Caleb explained quickly. The children, Evelyn, Garrett, the siege. Torres listened without interrupting. How many hostiles? He asked when Caleb finished. Started with 6, we dropped 3, but Garrett can probably bring in more. Armed with what? Automatic weapons, night vision, professional-grade equipment. And you've got civilians, including children. 7 kids, 1 wounded woman. Me. Torres was quiet for a moment. This is a suicide mission. You know that, right? Even if I bring my whole team, we're looking at a nightmare extraction. And going up against Marcus Garrett, we could all end up in body bags or jail cells. I know. So why should we risk it? Caleb looked at Tommy sleeping in Madison's lap, at Sarah curled up with the twins, at Daniel standing guard despite his injured arm, at Evelyn, who'd given up everything for children who weren't even hers. Because they're worth it, he said simply. Because someone has to stand up to men like Garrett. Because if we don't, who will? Another pause. Then Torres laughed, short and sharp. Martinez said you were crazy. All right, Holt. I've got 4 men with me right now. We're 2 hours out if we drive fast. Can you hold until then? We don't have a choice. Good answer. Keep your heads down. Don't do anything heroic. We're coming. The phone went dead. 2 hours. They had to survive 2 more hours. Caleb gathered everyone in the living room, away from the windows and the glaring lights. Help is coming. 2 hours. We just have to hold on until then. 2 hours is a long time, Daniel said quietly. It is. But we've made it this far. We can make it 2 more hours. What if they attack again? Tommy asked, his voice small and scared. Then we fight. Same as before. Together. Evelyn squeezed Caleb's hand, quick and fierce. Thank you for everything, for not giving up on us. I should be thanking you. You gave me a reason to care again, gave me a purpose. Outside, Garrett's voice boomed again through the speakers. I'm a patient man, Mr. Holt, but my patience has limits. You have until midnight to bring those children out. After that, I stopped being civilized about this. Caleb checked his watch. 10:15 p.m. They needed to hold for almost 2 hours. It was going to be the longest 2 hours of his life. But as he looked around at these 8 people who'd stumbled into his barn 5 days ago, who'd brought chaos and danger and purpose back into his hollow existence, Caleb knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd hold this house until his last breath if that's what it took. Because some things were worth dying for, and some battles had to be fought, no matter the cost. The minutes crawled by like wounded animals, each one an eternity of tension and watching shadows. Caleb moved between positions, checking sight lines, conserving what little ammunition they had left. The spotlights never wavered, turning the house into a fishbowl, exposing every movement to whoever was watching from the darkness beyond. At 10:47 p.m., the speakers crackled again. 43 minutes, Mr. Holt. I do hope you're reconsidering your position. I'd hate for this to end badly for everyone involved. Garrett's voice was smooth, almost friendly, like he was discussing a business deal over expensive whiskey instead of threatening to murder a house full of people. Caleb didn't respond. Didn't give him the satisfaction. In the kitchen, Evelyn was rationing out the last of the water. Her face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but her hands remained steady. Madison sat nearby, cleaning the Remington with the careful attention Caleb had taught her. The younger children huddled together in the attic, silent and watchful. How's your arm? Caleb asked Daniel, who'd taken up position by the eastern window. Hurts like hell, but I can still shoot. The boy's eyes never left the darkness beyond the lights. They're moving out there. I can see shadows. They're getting ready for something. I know. They'll hit us hard right before midnight. Try to break our will before the deadline. Will your friends get here in time? Caleb checked his watch. 10:51. Torres had said 2 hours from the time they spoke, which meant another hour and 9 minutes minimum. Maybe longer depending on road conditions. I don't know, he admitted. But we don't need them to win. We just need them to arrive. The moment reinforcements show up, Garrett loses his advantage. And if they don't show up? Caleb met the boy's eyes, saw the fear there, carefully controlled but present. Saw, too, the determination, the strength that had kept him alive through whatever hell Garrett had put him through. Then we make him pay so dearly for this house that he spends the rest of his life regretting he ever came here. Daniel nodded slowly. I can live with that. A crash from outside made them both spin. One of the SUVs had moved closer, its spotlight now pointed directly at the front door. A second vehicle repositioned to the west side of the house. They're tightening the noose, Evelyn said from the kitchen doorway, getting ready to rush us from multiple directions at once. Let them come. Caleb's voice was hard. We've got surprises left. Over the past hours, they'd prepared more than just defensive positions. Caleb had rigged the propane tank from his backup generator with a remote detonator, crude but effective. Had placed it near the western approach where the terrain funneled any attack into a kill zone. If Garrett's men came that way, they'd get more than they bargained for. He'd also scattered caltrops, welded nails from his workshop, in the snow around the house, invisible in the darkness, deadly to vehicle tires and unwary feet. Small things, desperate things, but they might buy enough time. At 11:03, Tommy's voice called down from the attic. Mr. Caleb, there's someone walking toward the house, just one person. Caleb moved to a position where he could see. Sure enough, a single figure was approaching through the lights, hands raised and empty. As it got closer, Caleb recognized Marcus Garrett himself, walking with the confidence of a man who'd never known real fear. He stopped about 30 feet from the porch, close enough to be heard without the speakers, far enough to be outside easy pistol range. "Mr. Holt, might we speak? Man to man?" Every instinct screamed trap. But Caleb found himself opening the door, stepping out onto the porch with his rifle held ready. The cold hit him immediately, stealing his breath. "You've got 30 seconds, Caleb said. Garrett smiled, looking relaxed despite the freezing temperature and the rifle pointed at his chest. "I wanted to offer you one final opportunity. I'm prepared to be extraordinarily generous. $500,000, cash. You let me walk out of here with what's mine, and you never hear from me again." "They're not yours." "Legally, they are. I have documentation, court orders, everything properly filed and notarized. You're the one breaking the law here, Mr. Holt, not me. Documentation can be faked, courts can be bought. I've heard what you did to those kids." The delusions of traumatized children fed to them by a mentally unstable woman. Garrett's voice took on a tone of patient reasonableness. "I understand you're a widower, lonely, desperate for purpose. This must feel noble to you, protecting the innocent, playing the hero." "I'm no hero." "No, you're not. You're a bitter old man clinging to a dying ranch, trying to recapture some sense of meaning." Garrett took a step closer. "But this isn't Afghanistan, Mr. Holt. This isn't some third world battlefield where you can shoot your way to victory. This is America. This is Montana, and here power matters, money matters. I have both. You have neither. I have something you don't." "And what's that?" "Nothing left to lose." Garrett's smile faltered for just a moment. "Everyone has something to lose. This ranch, for instance. 4 generations of Holts worked this land. Your great-grandfather built the original homestead. Your grandfather expanded it. Your father modernized it. All that history, all that legacy. Would be a shame if something happened to it." The threat was clear. Caleb felt rage burn through him, hot and pure. "You threatening to burn me out?" "I'm merely pointing out that property can be fragile, especially in winter. Fires spread so quickly in this dry cold. And with the roads still not fully cleared, fire department response time can be measured in hours rather than minutes." "You son of a—" "700,000, Garrett interrupted. "That's my final offer. More money than this ranch will ever be worth. Enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from here. Just bring me those children and walk away." Caleb stared at this man who thought everything had a price, who believed money could erase what he'd done, who stood there in the freezing night offering blood money like it was the most natural thing in the world. "The answer's no," Caleb said quietly. "It was no an hour ago. It's no now. It'll be no tomorrow and every day after. You're not taking those kids. Not while I'm breathing." Garrett's mask finally slipped. The friendly businessman disappeared, and what emerged was something cold and reptilian. "Then you'll die," he said simply. "You and everyone in that house. I'll make it look like a tragic accident. A propane explosion, perhaps, or a fire that spread too quickly. The authorities will investigate, of course, but they'll find exactly what I want them to find. And those children will still end up exactly where they belong, with me. Maybe. But you'll have to explain the bodies of your men that are scattered around my property. Hard to make that look like an accident. Men die in Montana winters all the time. Tragic, but hardly suspicious." The two men stared at each other across the frozen distance. Caleb could see calculation in Garrett's eyes, could practically watch him weighing options, measuring risks. "Midnight, Mr. Holt. That's when this ends. One way or another." Garrett turned and walked back toward his vehicles, his footsteps crunching in the snow. Caleb watched him go, then retreated back into the house. "What did he want?" Evelyn asked immediately. "To buy us. When that didn't work, to threaten us." Caleb checked his watch. 11:14. "They're coming at midnight. Full assault. He's done negotiating. How long until your friends arrive?" "Not long enough." Madison appeared from the back room, her face pale but determined. "Then we hold them as long as we can. We've done it before. That was different. They were probing our defenses. This time they'll come with everything, all at once. Overwhelming force. So what do we do? Caleb looked around at these people who'd become something more than strangers in the past 5 days, at the children who'd learned to trust again, at the woman who'd sacrificed everything for them, at the makeshift family that had formed in his kitchen over shared meals and shared danger. We fight, he said simply. We fight like our lives depend on it, because they do. The next 40 minutes were spent in final preparations. Caleb distributed the last of the ammunition, showed everyone their fallback positions if the main floor was breached, explained the escape route through the root cellar if everything went completely wrong, though where they'd run to in the frozen Montana wilderness, he had no idea. At 11:47, the spotlights suddenly cut out. Darkness crashed over them like a wave. After hours of glaring illumination, the absence of light was disorienting, blinding. Caleb blinked hard, trying to force his night vision to kick in. "Here they come," Daniel said quietly. Caleb heard it too, the sound of car doors opening, boots crunching in snow, men moving into position with the practiced efficiency of trained operators. "Everyone down," Caleb ordered. "Don't shoot until you have a clear target. Make every round count." The children in the attic went silent. Madison positioned herself by the stairs, the Remington steady in her hands. Daniel covered the east side. Evelyn took the kitchen, and Caleb stood by the front window, rifle ready, watching shadows move in the darkness. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. The back door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. The western window shattered as something came crashing through. The front door shuddered under repeated blows from what sounded like a battering ram. Caleb fired through the front door, heard a scream, kept firing. Wood chips flew. The door held, barely, but he could see it wouldn't last long. Behind him, gunfire erupted from the kitchen. Evelyn's shotgun boomed once, twice. Someone screamed. Glass continued to shatter. "They're in the kitchen!" Evelyn's voice was tight with pain and effort. Caleb spun, saw a dark figure emerging through the back door. He fired twice. The figure dropped. But there was another behind him, and another. Too many. Too fast. "Madison, fall back to position 2!" The girl grabbed Tommy and Sarah, dragged them toward the stairs. The front door finally gave way with a thunderous crash, and 2 men rushed through, weapons up and firing. Caleb dove behind the overturned couch, felt bullets tear through the fabric inches from his head. He came up shooting, dropped one attacker, wounded the second, but they kept coming. This was it, the final push. They were being overrun. Then Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "The propane! Hit the propane!" Caleb understood immediately. He fumbled for the detonator in his pocket, pressed the button, prayed it would work. The western side of the house erupted in a ball of flame. The explosion was massive, far bigger than Caleb had anticipated. The shockwave blew out every window on that side of the house. Heat and light filled the night. Screams echoed across the snow as men caught in the blast went down hard. In the sudden illumination, Caleb saw everything with terrible clarity. 4 of Garrett's men down, 2 retreating toward the vehicles, and Garrett himself standing by his SUV, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. But the explosion had a cost. The western wall of the house was on fire now, flames spreading fast through the dry old wood. Smoke began filling the rooms. "We have to get out!" Evelyn shouted. "The house is burning!" She was right. Within minutes, the whole structure would be engulfed. They'd won the battle, but the house was lost. "Everyone to the root cellar! Now!" They moved as one. Madison herding the younger children, Daniel providing cover, Evelyn clutching her injured arm but moving fast. Caleb brought up the rear, firing at shadows, trying to buy them seconds. They piled through the trapdoor into the root cellar just as the kitchen ceiling began to collapse. Smoke poured down after them, thick and choking. Caleb slammed the trapdoor shut and threw the bolt. In the darkness of the cellar, 8 people huddled together, coughing and gasping. Above them, the house groaned and cracked as the fire consumed it. "The tunnel," Evelyn gasped. "Is there a tunnel? Please tell me there's a tunnel." "Storm cellar," Caleb managed between coughs. "Exits 50 yards north. We can get out, but then we're exposed. In the open. Better than burning to death down here." She had a point. Caleb fumbled for his flashlight, found it, clicked it on. 7 soot-stained faces stared back at him in the dim light. "Stay close, stay quiet." When we emerge, we run for the tree line. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run. He led them through the narrow tunnel his grandfather had dug during the Cold War, back when people built these things convinced the Russians were coming. The walls were earth and old timber, held up more by prayer than engineering. It smelled of damp and rot and age. They emerged into the frozen night through a metal hatch disguised as a natural snowdrift. Caleb pushed it open carefully, rifle ready, expecting gunfire. Instead, he heard engines, lots of them, and voices shouting. He risked a look and his heart nearly stopped. 5 new vehicles had arrived, armored trucks with spotlights that turned the scene into day. Men in tactical gear were spreading out, weapons ready, moving with the precision of a military operation. But these weren't Garrett's men. They wore patches that read Torres Security. The cavalry had arrived. Caleb watched in stunned amazement as Torres's team surrounded Garrett's remaining forces, watched as they disarmed the men who'd been trying to kill them moments before, watched as Marcus Garrett himself was forced to his knees in the snow, his hands zip-tied behind his back. A tall man with a scarred face and kind eyes approached the storm cellar. "Holt? That you?" "Torres? Good to finally meet you. Sorry we're late. Roads were hell." Torres extended a hand, pulled Caleb up out of the cellar, then helped Evelyn, then each of the children in turn. "How did you—" "Called in every favor I had. Contacted the state police, FBI, even reached out to a federal prosecutor who's been trying to build a case against Garrett for years." Torres grinned. "Turns out, having a house full of witnesses and a documented siege goes a long way toward getting people to move fast." Blue and red lights appeared in the distance, growing closer. Real law enforcement this time. The kind that couldn't be bought or intimidated. Caleb looked back at his house. It was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the stars. 4 generations of Holt history burning to ash. Everything his family had built, everything he and Sarah had shared, gone. Evelyn moved beside him, slipped her good hand into his. "I'm sorry. About your home. It's just a building." And Caleb realized as he said it that it was true. The house was just wood and nails. What mattered, what really mattered, was standing around him now. Home is wherever the people you care about are. Marcus Garrett was being loaded into a state police vehicle, still protesting, still threatening, still convinced his money and power would save him. Torres walked over to Caleb, his expression grim. "We found 3 bodies. Your work?" "Self-defense. They were trying to kill us." "I believe you. So do the state troopers. They've been collecting shell casings, documenting everything. Between the physical evidence and the testimony of 8 witnesses, Garrett's going down hard." "You really think so? Man like that just made his first real mistake. He came after kids with witnesses present. He laid siege to a private residence with illegal weapons. He killed his own men in the process. The FBI is already talking RICO charges, federal kidnapping, about a dozen other things that'll put him away for life." Evelyn was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. The children gathered around her, and suddenly they were all crying, not from fear this time, but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that it was actually over. They were safe. Finally, truly safe. Caleb found himself pulled into that embrace, 7 children and 1 woman holding on like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. And maybe he was. Maybe that was enough. "Mr. Holt?" Tommy's small voice was muffled against his chest. "What happens now? Where do we go?" Caleb looked around at the ruins of his house, at the emergency vehicles filling his yard, at Torres and his team standing guard. He thought about what he had left: a barn, some outbuildings, 400 acres of Montana land, and 8 people who needed him as much as he needed them. "I don't know yet, buddy," he said honestly, "but we'll figure it out, together." As dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of pink and gold, Caleb Holt stood in the ruins of his old life and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. The house was gone. His solitude was shattered. His quiet, predictable existence had been blown apart as surely as that propane tank. But standing there with Evelyn's hand in his, with 7 children gathered close, with the threat of Marcus Garrett finally neutralized, Caleb realized something. He'd spent 3 years dying slowly on this ranch, convinced that losing Sarah meant losing everything worth living for. It had taken a bleeding woman and 7 terrified children appearing in a blizzard to show him the truth. Some things were worth losing. Some things had to burn away so new things could grow. His house was gone. But his home, his real home, was just beginning. Torres approached with a thermal blanket. "Ambulance is here. We need to get you all checked out, especially her." He nodded toward Evelyn. "We're fine," Evelyn protested, but her voice was weak. "You've been shot, ma'am. You need a hospital." "If I go to a hospital, they'll separate us. They'll put the kids in the system." "Actually, they won't." A new voice joined the conversation. A woman in a FBI jacket, middle-aged with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Special Agent Chen, I've been investigating Garrett's operation for 18 months. You just handed me the break I needed." She knelt down to the children's level. "You've all been incredibly brave. Heroes. Every one of you. And I promise you I will personally make sure you stay together while we sort this out. No foster homes. No separation. You have my word." "Can we stay with Mr. Holt?" Madison asked. "And Miss Evelyn?" Agent Chen looked up at Caleb and Evelyn. "That's your preference?" Caleb didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then we'll make it work. Temporary emergency custody while we investigate. Long term, we'll see. But for now, you all stay together." The relief on the children's faces was almost painful to witness. Tommy actually laughed, a sound of pure joy that seemed impossibly bright against the darkness of the night they'd endured. As the paramedics checked them over, as agents swarmed the property collecting evidence, as the sun finally broke free of the mountains and bathed everything in golden light, Caleb felt the last of the ice around his heart finally crack and fall away. Sarah would have loved this chaos, would have jumped right in, organizing everyone, making sure the kids were fed and warm and safe. She'd always had that gift, the ability to see what people needed and provide it without hesitation. Maybe that gift hadn't died with her. Maybe Caleb had just forgotten how to use it. He looked at Evelyn, saw her watching the children with fierce, protective love, saw the same determination in her eyes that had driven her to risk everything to save them. "We're going to need a bigger house," he said. She laughed through her tears. "We're going to need a lot of things. Beds, clothes, school supplies, everything. We'll figure it out." "You keep saying that." "Because I believe it." And he did. For the first time in years, Caleb actually believed that the future might hold something other than endless gray days and memories of what he'd lost. Torres approached again, his expression serious. "Garrett's talking, making threats. Says he's going to bury you in lawsuits. Says he's going to own this ranch by the time he's done." "Let him try." Caleb felt remarkably calm. "He can take the land if he wants it. The buildings are already gone. All that's left is dirt and memories." "That's not nothing." "No, but it's not everything either." The state police finished loading Garrett into their vehicle. As it pulled away, Garrett's eyes locked with Caleb's through the window. There was hate there, and disbelief. The look of a man who'd never lost before and couldn't comprehend how it had happened. Caleb stared back until the vehicle disappeared down the road. "It's really over," Daniel said quietly, appearing at Caleb's elbow. "We're really safe." "Yeah, kid, you really are. What you did, taking us in, fighting for us. You didn't have to do any of that." "Yes, I did." Caleb looked down at the boy who'd stood guard with a rifle, who'd fought like a soldier despite being barely 13. Sometimes you don't get to choose when or where you make your stand. You just have to recognize the moment when it arrives and be brave enough to act. "Were you scared?" "Terrified." "But you did it anyway." "That's what courage is, Daniel, being scared and doing it anyway." The boy thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "I want to be like you when I grow up." The words hit Caleb harder than he expected. For 3 years, he'd thought of himself as useless, a shell, a man with nothing left to offer the world. Now here was a kid looking at him like he was a hero. Maybe he wasn't useless after all. Maybe he just needed the right reason to remember who he used to be. The paramedics finally convinced Evelyn to get in the ambulance. She went reluctantly, making them promise the children could visit her at the hospital. Agent Chen assured her they'd all be together by nightfall. As the ambulance pulled away, Madison slipped her hand into Caleb's. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You saved our lives, all of our lives." "You saved yourselves. I just gave you a safe place to do it." The sun was fully up now, revealing the extent of the damage. His house was a smoking ruin. The yard was torn up, shell casings glinting in the snow. Bullet holes pocked every building, but his barn still stood. His land was still here. And most importantly, 8 people who'd been lost had found their way home. It would take time to rebuild, time to heal, time to figure out what came next. But Caleb had time now. For the first time in 3 years, he had all the time in the world, and he had people to share it with. As the emergency vehicles began to clear out and Torres's team finished their sweep, Caleb walked back toward his barn with 6 children trailing behind him like ducklings, the structure that had sheltered them that first night, where this whole crazy journey had begun. "Mr. Holt?" Tommy tugged on his sleeve. "Are we really going to stay here? With you? If you want to." "Forever?" Caleb knelt down, looked the little boy in the eyes. "Nothing's forever, buddy. But for as long as you need a home, yeah, this is it. This is yours." The child threw his arms around Caleb's neck and held on tight. And standing there in the ruins of his old life, holding a child who'd survived hell and come out the other side, Caleb Holt finally understood what Sarah had been trying to tell him all along. Life wasn't about holding on to what you'd lost. It was about finding the courage to build something new. The snow had stopped falling, the smoke was clearing, and somewhere beyond the mountains, the future was waiting. Whatever it held, Caleb knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't face it alone. 3 months later, Caleb stood in the skeleton of what would become the new house and watched spring fight its way into Montana. The snow had finally surrendered to mud and the first brave shoots of grass. The mountains had shed their white coats for green, and everywhere he looked, the world was waking up from its long winter sleep. The insurance money had come through faster than expected. Turned out having federal agents document your house burning down during a siege made the claim process remarkably straightforward. Combined with a donation from Torres and his team, and an unexpected fundraiser organized by people in town who'd heard the story, Caleb had enough to rebuild. But he wasn't rebuilding the same house. This one was different, bigger, with 8 bedrooms instead of 3, with a kitchen large enough for a family, with spaces designed for noise and chaos and life. "The foundation looks good," Torres said, walking up beside him. The man had stayed in Montana, claiming he wanted to oversee the security installation personally. Caleb suspected he just wanted to make sure they were actually safe. "Frame should go up next week if the weather holds. Can't thank you enough for all this. Stop thanking me. You gave me the best story I've had in years. My team's gotten more business from the publicity around this case than we got in the previous 5 years combined." Torres grinned. "Turns out people like hiring security firms that take down corrupt billionaires. How's the trial going?" Torres's grin widened. "Prosecution rested yesterday. Garrett's lawyers are scrambling. Between Evelyn's testimony, the kids' statements, and the physical evidence, they've got nothing. Word is he'll be lucky to see daylight again before he's 90. Caleb felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. "Good. More than good. FBI raided his compound last month, found evidence of at least 15 other children over the past decade. They're tracking them all down now, making sure they're safe. What you did here, Holt, you didn't just save 7 kids, you saved dozens, maybe more." The weight of that settled over Caleb like a blanket. All those children, all those lives. He'd just been trying to do the right thing in the moment, hadn't thought about ripples spreading outward. "Mr. Caleb!" Tommy's voice rang across the construction site. The boy came running, his face split in a huge grin, mud splattered on his jeans. "Miss Evelyn says lunch is ready, and she made your favorite." "My favorite? Grilled cheese and tomato soup!" Tommy grabbed his hand, started tugging him toward the barn. "Come on, before the twins eat everything." The barn had become their temporary home while the house was being built. Caleb had insulated it, installed a wood stove, partitioned off sleeping areas. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and dry and theirs. The children had decorated their spaces with drawings and posters. Madison had hung fairy lights. Daniel had built shelves for books. It looked lived in, loved. Inside, chaos reigned in the best possible way. Jacob and Jason were setting the table, arguing about whose turn it was to wash dishes. Sarah was helping Evelyn stir the soup, chattering about something that happened at school. Madison sat with her homework spread across the counter, occasionally offering advice to the younger ones. Daniel emerged from the back with an armload of firewood, nearly colliding with Tommy. "Watch it, Squirt. You watch it. You're the one who can't see around wood." "Boys," Evelyn said mildly, not looking up from the soup. "Play nice or no dessert." Both boys immediately settled down. Evelyn's word was law in this household, even more than Caleb's. She'd recovered well from the gunshot wound, though she still favored her left arm on cold days. The doctors said she'd been lucky. Another inch, and she might have lost full use of the limb, but luck seemed to be a theme in their story. Lucky that they'd found Caleb's barn. Lucky that he'd chosen to help instead of turn them away. Lucky that Torres had arrived when he did. Or maybe it wasn't luck at all. Maybe it was just the universe finally balancing the scales. "How's the house coming?" Evelyn asked as Caleb washed his hands at the makeshift sink. "Good. Torres says the frame goes up next week. And we'll be able to move in by summer?" "That's the plan. Assuming nothing goes wrong." "When has anything ever gone wrong in our lives?" Madison said dryly, not looking up from her math homework. The table erupted in laughter. Even Caleb found himself grinning. The girl had developed a wicked sense of humor over the past months, her confidence growing daily. They all had changed. Tommy no longer flinched at sudden movements. Sarah had stopped hoarding food in her pillowcase. The twins smiled more. Daniel had started talking about maybe joining the army someday, like Caleb had. And Evelyn had transformed from a woman running for her life into someone who'd found her purpose. She'd enrolled in online classes, working toward a degree in social work. Said she wanted to help other kids like hers. Wanted to make sure what happened with Garrett never happened again. "Agent Chen called this morning," Evelyn said, ladling soup into bowls. "She wanted to know if we'd be willing to speak at a conference next month about child advocacy and protection." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd ask you. And the kids." Evelyn looked around the table. "She wants to know if any of you would be comfortable sharing your stories. Not the details, just how it felt to be seen, to be believed, to be protected." The children exchanged glances. Finally, Madison spoke up. "I'll do it. If it helps other kids, I'll do it." "Me too," Daniel added. "Someone needs to tell people what actually happens. The kids like us exist." One by one, the others agreed. Even Tommy, though he made Caleb promise to be there with him. "Looks like we're giving a speech," Caleb said. "Looks like we're becoming a family of activists," Evelyn corrected, her eyes twinkling. The word family settled over the table like a blessing. Nobody questioned it, nobody argued. It was simply true. After lunch, Caleb found himself in the barn's back corner, where he'd set up a small workshop. He was building a bookshelf for Madison. She'd been complaining about her books piling up on the floor. Simple work, the kind that let his mind wander. He heard the door creak and looked up to find Evelyn watching him. "Need something?" he asked. "Just wanted to talk, away from little ears." She moved closer, running her hand along the smooth wood. The adoption paperwork came through. All 7 of them are officially mine. Legally, permanently mine. "That's wonderful." "It is. But there's something else." Evelyn took a breath. "The lawyer asked if there was a father in the picture, someone who might want to co-adopt." Caleb's hand stilled on the wood. "Evelyn, I'm not asking you to marry me," she said quickly. "I'm not even sure either of us is ready for that. But Caleb, these kids already see you as their father. You're the one teaching Daniel to drive. You're the one reading bedtime stories to Tommy. You're the one helping Sarah with her nightmares. That's just being a parent. That's being a parent." Evelyn's eyes were bright, but her voice was steady. "I'm asking if you want to make it official, co-adoption, shared custody, a real family, not just people living together in a barn." Caleb thought about Sarah, about the children they'd never had, about the empty years after she died when he'd convinced himself he was done with living. Then he thought about 7 kids who'd needed him, who'd given him a reason to care again, Who'd taught him that family wasn't just about blood or genetics or perfect timing? Yes, he said simply. Yes, I want that. Evelyn's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the whole ranch. She crossed the space between them and hugged him, careful of her shoulder, but fierce nonetheless. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for taking us in, for fighting for us, for choosing us. You chose me first, Caleb said. You chose to trust a stranger when you had no reason to trust anyone. Best decision I ever made. They stood there for a moment, two broken people who'd found each other in a blizzard and built something neither of them had expected. The kids are going to lose their minds, Evelyn said, pulling back. Madison's been dropping hints for weeks. She's not subtle. None of them are. Daniel asked me last month if I was going to be his real dad or just his temporary dad. What did you tell him? That I didn't know what the future held, but that I wasn't going anywhere. Caleb paused. Guess I can give him a better answer now. That night, they gathered everyone in the barn's main room. The children sensed something was up. They'd learned to read moods, to watch for danger. Old habits died hard. Nobody's in trouble, Evelyn said immediately, seeing their tension. Actually, this is good news. Really good news. The house is done early? Tommy guessed. Better than that. Evelyn looked at Caleb, gave him a nod. He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. How would you all feel about making this permanent? Officially? 7 pairs of eyes stared at him. Evelyn's adoption of you all went through. You're legally hers now, but we were thinking, if you're comfortable with it, I could adopt you too, all of you. The silence stretched. Then Tommy launched himself at Caleb with enough force to nearly knock him over. Does that mean you're my dad? My real dad? If you want me to be. Yes, 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 yes. Tommy was crying and laughing at the same time. I never had a dad before. Not a real one. Sarah was next, then the twins, then Madison and Daniel together. Suddenly Caleb was buried under children, all of them talking at once, crying, laughing, holding on like he might disappear if they let go. Over their heads he met Evelyn's eyes. She was crying too, but she was smiling. This was what Sarah had wanted for him. Not to forget her, but to remember that his heart could still expand, could still love, could still build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Group hug, Tommy declared, and somehow they all managed to pull Evelyn into the pile. 8 people tangled together in a converted barn, holding each other like they were the most precious things in the world. Because they were. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and legal proceedings and interviews. Agent Chen made sure the process moved quickly, calling in favors, expediting where she could. The judge who handled the adoption was a woman in her 60s who'd been following the case in the news. Mr. Holt, she said during the final hearing, I've presided over thousands of adoptions. I've seen every kind of family configuration imaginable, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Caleb's heart sank. Was she going to deny it? Find some legal reason why? I've never seen a family forged in such extraordinary circumstances, she continued. 7 children who survived unimaginable trauma, a woman who risked everything to save them, and a man who chose to stand between them and evil when he had every reason to look the other way. She signed the papers with a flourish. Congratulations, you're officially a family. The courtroom erupted in applause. Torres was there, grinning. Agent Chen was dabbing at her eyes. Half the town had shown up. People Caleb barely knew who'd been following the story, who wanted to witness this moment. Outside the courthouse, a reporter approached. Mr. Holt, can we get a statement? How does it feel to be a father to 7 children? Caleb looked down at Tommy holding his hand, at Madison standing proud beside Evelyn, at all 7 kids who were now legally, permanently his. Feels like I finally found my way home, he said simply. Spring turned to summer. The new house rose from the ashes of the old, its frame standing strong against the Montana sky. The children helped where they could. The twins proved surprisingly good at basic carpentry. Madison had an eye for design. Daniel was strong enough to actually be useful with the heavy lifting. They built it together. Every nail, every board, every decision made as a family. Kitchen should be here, Evelyn said, standing in what would eventually be the heart of the home. Big enough for everyone to help with cooking. Living room there, Madison added, with enough couch space for movie nights. And my room needs to be far from the twins, Sarah announced. They snore. We do not. Do too. Caleb listened to them argue and plan and dream and felt something he'd thought was dead forever stirring in his chest. Not replacing the love he'd had for Sarah, nothing could ever replace that. But something new. Something that honored her memory by proving that his heart could still grow. One evening in late July, with the house finally livable and move-in day scheduled for the weekend, Caleb climbed up to the unfinished second floor and found the spot where his and Sarah's bedroom had been. The view was the same, looking west toward the mountains, toward the sunset. Thought I'd find you here. Evelyn's voice was soft. Just remembering. You still miss her. Every day. But it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Caleb turned to face her. It used to feel like drowning. Now it feels like she's still part of this. Part of us. I think she'd be proud of what you've built. What we've built, Caleb corrected. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Evelyn moved to stand beside him, looking out at the same view. You know, when I grabbed those kids and ran, I had no plan, no destination. I just knew I had to get them away from Garrett, had to save them. And you did. We did. Together. She paused. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous hobby. She smiled. The house has room, more than enough for just the 9 of us. You thinking about fostering? More than that. There are so many kids out there like ours were, trapped in bad situations, needing someone to fight for them. What if we became that someone? Not just once, but ongoing. A real safe house, a real sanctuary. Caleb considered it. The idea should have terrified him, opening their home to more trauma, more pain, more risk. But instead it felt right, felt like purpose. We'd need more help. Can't do it just the 2 of us. Torres already volunteered to handle security. Agent Chen knows social workers who'd help with the legal side. And the kids? Evelyn gestured down to where all 7 were playing in the yard, their laughter drifting up through the open windows. They've already said they want to help other kids like them. Then I guess we're doing this. You're sure? Caleb thought about the night Evelyn and the children had stumbled into his barn. Thought about how close he'd come to turning them away. Thought about what his life would be now if he had. Empty, hollow, still waiting to die. I'm sure. We've got the land, we've got the house, we've got the love. Might as well share it. Evelyn kissed his cheek, quick and warm. Sarah chose well when she married you. I like to think so. Move-in day arrived with chaos and celebration. The children raced through the new house, claiming rooms, arguing over who got which bathroom, marveling at the space. Tommy insisted his room was too big. He'd get lost. Madison declared hers perfect. The twins immediately started planning how to sneak between their rooms without being detected. That first night in the new house, Caleb gathered everyone in the living room. The furniture was mostly unpacked, the kitchen was functional, and Evelyn had managed to cook a proper dinner despite half the boxes still being stacked in corners. I want to say something, Caleb started, then found himself surprisingly choked up. 3 months ago, my house burned down. Everything I owned, every memory I'd been holding on to, gone. The children grew quiet, attentive. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen, losing the last pieces of my old life. He looked around at each face, Evelyn's, Madison's, Daniel's, down to little Tommy's. But I was wrong. That fire didn't take anything away. It made room for all of you. This house isn't a replacement for what was lost. It's something completely new, built on different foundations, built for a different purpose. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Built for family, for love, for second chances. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know what challenges we'll face or what obstacles we'll overcome. But I know we'll face them together, all of us, as a family. So here's to new beginnings. Caleb raised his glass of water in a toast. To the family we chose and the home we built together. To family, the children chorused, raising their own glasses. They clinked them together, the sound bright and clear in the new space. And as they did, Caleb could have sworn he felt something, A warmth, a presence, a sense of Sarah smiling down at them. She'd always told him that love multiplied instead of divided, that opening your heart didn't diminish what you'd had before. It expanded what you could have now. He finally understood what she meant. The months that followed brought their own challenges. Nightmares still plagued some of the children. Therapy was ongoing. Trust was a daily choice, not a one-time decision. But slowly, steadily, they healed. Tommy's laugh became louder, more frequent. Sarah stopped hoarding food. Madison started talking about college. Daniel joined the high school wrestling team and thrived. And Caleb? Caleb learned how to be a father, learned the patience required for homework help and the firmness needed for discipline, learned when to offer advice and when to just listen, learned that loving these children didn't diminish his love for Sarah. It honored it. 6 months after moving into the new house, their first foster placement arrived. A girl, 9 years old, who'd been pulled from a neglectful home. She was quiet and withdrawn, flinching at sudden movements, clearly expecting the worst. "This is Emma," Agent Chen said, introducing her. "Emma, this is the Holt family." 7 children immediately surrounded her, not threatening, just welcoming, showing her the house, introducing themselves, making her feel seen. "You're safe here," Madison told her quietly. "I know it's hard to believe, but you really are safe." Emma looked up at Caleb with huge, scared eyes. He recognized that look, had seen it in every one of his children's faces that first night in the barn. "Welcome home, Emma," he said gently. "Take all the time you need to settle in. No pressure, no expectations, just safety." The girl's lower lip trembled. Then, slowly, she nodded. She was there first, but she wouldn't be there last. Over the next 2 years, 15 children passed through their doors. Some stayed for weeks, some for months. Most eventually reunified with family or found permanent placements. But while they were there, they were loved, protected, given the space to heal. And all of them left knowing that not all adults would hurt them. That somewhere in Montana, there was a ranch where broken things could be mended, where children mattered more than convenience, where love was freely given without conditions or demands. The town took notice. What started as one family's story became a movement. Other families began fostering. The school system implemented better trauma-informed practices. The local police department got training on recognizing signs of abuse. One life saved had rippled outward, changing everything it touched. On the second anniversary of the night Evelyn and the children had stumbled into his barn, Caleb stood on the porch of his new house and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. The yard was full of life, children playing, Evelyn tending her garden, Torres visiting with updates on the security system. "Mr. Dad?" Tommy appeared at his elbow. He was 8 now, taller, more confident, but he still sometimes reverted to his original name for Caleb. "You okay?" "More than okay, buddy. Just thinking." "About Miss Sarah?" "Yeah. About how she'd love all this. The noise and the chaos and the mess." Tommy considered this seriously. "I think she's happy. Up in heaven or wherever. I think she can see us and she's proud." "You think so?" "I know so. Because she loved you and she'd want you to be happy. And you're happy now, right?" Caleb looked down at this child who'd been so scared and small that first night, who'd survived things no child should have to survive, who'd found the courage to trust again, to love again, to believe in goodness despite everything. "Yeah, Tommy, I'm happy now." "Good. Me too." The boy hugged him quickly, then ran off to join the others. Evelyn joined Caleb on the porch, slipping her hand into his. They'd been married for 6 months now. A quiet ceremony in the backyard with just the children and a few close friends. Nothing fancy, nothing formal, just 2 people promising to walk the rest of their lives together. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "New placement arriving." 3 kids this time, right? The siblings they couldn't split up? Ages 6, 8, and 11. Been in the system for 2 years. Finally found a caseworker who insisted they stay together. "We've got room." "We always have room." Evelyn leaned against him. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life. That we went from running for our lives to running a sanctuary. Funny how things work out. That's one word for it." She smiled. I prefer miraculous. Caleb thought about that word. Miraculous. Maybe it fit. Against all odds, against all logic, something beautiful had grown from the ashes of that terrible night. 7 children saved. Dozens more helped. A family forged in fire and fear and desperate courage. Marcus Garrett got life without parole, Evelyn said quietly. Agent Chen called. The judge handed down the sentence this morning. How do you feel about that? Free. Finally, completely free. She took a breath. He can't hurt anyone ever again. All those years he spent terrorizing children, stealing innocence, destroying lives. It's over. Justice served. Justice earned. By you, by the kids, by everyone who refused to look away. They stood together as the sun set and the stars emerged. The same stars that had watched over a bleeding woman and 7 terrified children 3 winters ago. The same Montana sky that had witnessed tragedy and triumph. Inside the house was warm with light and laughter. Their children, biological, adopted, fostered, it didn't matter, were safe and loved and whole. Sarah would be proud of you, Evelyn said. She'd be proud of all of us. Think she's watching. Caleb looked up at the stars, at the vast Montana sky that seemed to hold infinite possibilities. Yeah, I think she is, and I think she's smiling. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, not threatening, just singing to the moon. The sound that had once seemed so lonely now sounded different to Caleb, like a call and an answer, like connection in the darkness. He'd thought his story ended when Sarah died, thought the best chapters were behind him, and all that remained was slow decline and eventual silence. But he'd been wrong. His story hadn't ended. It had just taken an unexpected turn, down a path he never could have anticipated or planned. A path that led to a bleeding woman in a barn, to 7 children who needed saving, to a siege and a fire and a choice that changed everything. Some stories ended in tragedy, some in triumph. This one ended in transformation, from solitude to family, from despair to hope, from merely surviving to actually living. The rancher who'd thought he had nothing left to give had given everything, and in giving had received more than he'd ever imagined possible. Inside, Tommy's voice called out, "Dad, Mom, come see what we made." Caleb squeezed Evelyn's hand. Together they turned and walked back into the light and warmth of their home, into the beautiful chaos of their chosen family, into the life they'd built from the ruins of the old. The Montana night settled around them, cold and clear and full of stars, and in a house on 400 acres of prairie, 8 people who'd all been broken in different ways sat down to dinner together. They said grace, not a prayer, but a moment of gratitude for the journey that brought them here, for the courage to keep going when giving up seemed easier, for finding each other in the darkness, for becoming, against all odds, exactly what each of them needed, a family. Not the family anyone would have chosen in the beginning, not the family that made sense on paper or followed any traditional path, but the family that mattered, the family that loved fiercely and protected fearlessly and held on tight through every storm, the family that proved, once and for all, that sometimes the things we lose make room for the things we need to find. And as Montana winter finally, fully released its grip and let spring bloom across the land, 8 broken lives became whole together. Not perfect, not without scars or struggles or hard days still to come, but whole, together, home. And that, Caleb thought as he looked around the dinner table at the faces he loved more than his own life, was more than enough. It was everything.